Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Today is day 3 of our Unit 1 Gaseous Exchange. And today we will cover the gaseous exchange in humans, inshallah. Gaseous exchange in humans. In humans, the process of respiration involves breathing. This is only one part, and you can see the diagram over here that how breathing takes place. When we breathe in, you can see that the diaphragm at the bottom, it contracts, and this is the diaphragm and it contracts, and these are the ribs, they expand, the chest expands, and then there an area of low concentration is created inside our chest, and therefore the gases enter our nasal cavity and they come into the lungs. Whereas during the breathing out or exhalation process or expiration process, the diaphragm relaxes and the lung contracts, the chest contracts, and therefore the gases inside the lungs they are pushed out and we exhale or breathe out. So this is one part of respiration which is called breathing. So in humans, the process of respiration involves breathing, which I've just explained, and with the help of this breathing, gaseous exchange takes place inside the lungs, and then cellular respiration is the final step of respiration. Like other terrestrial vertebrates, vertebrates are those animals that have a vertebra, that is the spinal cord, and terrestrial means land animals. Like other terrestrial vertebrates, our respiratory surface is located inside the body in the form of alveoli contained in paired organs, lungs. So we have already studied that lungs are not just simple sacs, but they are made of millions of microscopic sacs which are called alveoli. And because of these millions of sacs, the surface area increases a lot, and a lot of gaseous exchange can take place through the thin walls of the alveoli. Now let's look at the lungs. What do they look like? Our respiratory system consists of paired lungs located inside the thoracic chest cavity and air passage. So it is in the thorax. Our chest is a thorax. So inside the thorax or the thoracic cavity, air and air passageways, these are included. Lungs are located inside the thoracic cavity, and then there are air passageways. Now, what does our lung look like? It is soft and spongy, and the color is pinkish. And both the lungs are wrapped, and they are wrapped into a pleural membrane. So both of them are covered with pleural membranes. The space between pleural membranes is filled with fluid that acts like a lubricant, and we know that the gaseous exchange is better when it is through some lubricant. This makes the breathing movements easier. So let's go over again. So the appearance of the lungs is soft and spongy and pinkish, and our lungs are wrapped in pleural membranes, and the space between the pleural membranes and the actual lung is filled with a fluid and this acts like a lubricant and helps the movement in breathing easier. Lungs are enclosed in a bony cage made up of a flat sternum in front, and you can touch your chest and feel the sternum. And then there are 12 pairs, so 12 ribs on one side and 12 ribs on the other side of the sternum, and they go from front to back where the vertebral column is present, that's the spinal cord. So the ribs are then attached to the spinal cord. So this forms a whole cage which is called the rib cage. Ribs are attached with intercostal muscles. So the names of the muscles is intercostal muscles which are attached to the ribs, In the lower part of thorax lies a sheet of muscles called diaphragm. We have already seen diaphragm in the previous diagram, which separates it from the abdominal cavity. Each lung is made up of millions of alveoli. And over here in this diagram, you can see how different parts are labeled. This is, of course, the nose. And inside the nose, we have the nostrils and the nasal cavity. And then this is the mouth, and this is the oral cavity. Then both of them have the same part over here. And then they come to the pharynx and the larynx. Then the trachea begins from here. And then we have the bronchi, these branches of trachea. And then we have the rib cage and the alveoli. You can see that the bronchi is breaking down into further branches, and then there are several alveoli. And in the middle, we can see the heart in the background here. So this is our respiratory system. And this is the diagram in your book, and it has a little more detail. So let's look at them. Nose or the nostril, and then in the mouth, in the oral cavity, we have the tongue, and the mouth, the oral cavity and the nasal cavity is separated by a palate. And then we have the pharynx, the epiglottis. The epiglottis is the cover that stops things to enter in the glottis. And then we have the larynx, the trachea, left lung. Then we have the bronchioles, heart, and the several alveoli. And yes, all the heads are covered. Okay, now let's look at the alveoli in detail. Each alveolus, so alveoli is the plural and alveolus is the singular. Each alveolus is the respiratory surface. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created millions of alveoli in the lungs to increase the surface area so that we can exchange a lot of oxygen and give out all the waste carbon dioxide from our body. It's pouch-like and this microscopic structure made up of only one layer of cells. So a single cell, very thin wall, so that gaseous exchange can easily take place. It is enclosed by a dense capillary network. So they are tiny blood vessels, very tiny blood vessels called capillaries, which form a network around every sac. In each alveolus, exchange of gases takes place between air and blood. The air passageways consist of the nostrils, the trachea, then the bronchi, and then the bronchioles. Air from outside enters into the nasal sacs through external nostrils. This entire passage through which air passes is lined with mucus and ciliated cells. So it has tiny hair-like structures, plus it has mucus. So this is a lubricant that lubricates your nose and the nasal cavity. The internal surface has rich blood capillaries which turn the incoming air slightly hot. So because of the presence of these blood capillaries, the air that enters our body becomes warmer than it is. The hair in nasal sacs as well as ciliated epithelial lining and mucus keep the air clean by trapping and removing dust and germs. This ensures clean air to reach the respiratory system. So with the help of these hair and the ciliated structures in the epithelial lining and the mucus, they take in or absorb all the dust and dust particles and things that should not reach the lungs, and clean air reaches the lungs. Then the trachea, the internal opening of nasal sacs opens into a long tube, which is the trachea. You can see over here, this is the oral cavity, and it opens into the trachea. In its beginning, there is a box-like larynx. So this is the larynx, which is a box shaped, and it is called the sound box. So larynx is a sound box containing vocal cords to produce sound. So this is the sound box through which we speak and produce sound. The opening of larynx is known as glottis, which has a lid-like cover which is called epiglottis. So epiglottis closes this mouth, the glottis of the larynx, when food is swallowed. So during swallowing food or drink, the epiglottis closes the glottis to prevent any food to enter into the trachea. Trachea has C-shaped cartilaginous rings which prevent it from collapsing. So the whole trachea is surrounded by, or is made up of, these C-shaped cartilaginous rings. So these rings are there to keep it intact so that it doesn't collapse, यानी वो बंद नहीं हो जाती, it doesn't close like any soft tube would if there is no support in the wall. So the walls are made up of C-shaped cartilaginous rings, and because of these rings it is able to stay open and ready to receive the air. Otherwise it will collapse, it will shut down, it will join, the walls will join together. So they don't join together because of the presence of the C-shaped cartilaginous rings. And if you have seen the trachea in goats, you must have noticed that it is made up of cartilaginous wall, right? So this is similarly our trachea is also made with C-shaped cartilaginous rings. Then we come to bronchi. Trachea is the center of in the center of the thorax bifurcates. You can see the trachea, this is the larynx, and then this is the trachea, and then in the center of the chest it breaks down into two smaller ducts which are called bronchi. Each bronchus, that is one bronchus is singular and bronchi is plural, do have C-shaped cartilaginous rings. So they also have cartilaginous rings which are shown with these white lines. Bronchus of each side enters into the respective lung. As soon as it enters into the lung, it breaks up into many smaller ducts or bronchioles. So first the trachea is one whole, then in the middle of the chest it breaks into two branches which are called the bronchi, and then they break down inside the lungs to further smaller ducts which are called bronchioles. Now what is a bronchiole? Each bronchiole is very thin tube that opens into air sacs or alveoli. So these tiny bronchioles enter the tinier alveolar sacs, and these sacs are full of alveoli, very thin walled sacs. They are very thin walled and they are covered with blood vessels. Now, inspiration, we have already discussed this, but we will go over this again. It is a process through which atmospheric air is directed through the air passageways up to the alveoli in the lungs. It involves contraction of intercostal muscles and diaphragm. As a result, the volume of thorax, that is the chest, is increased, thereby decreasing the pressure of air in the lungs. So the pressure of air inside the lungs becomes less, so the external air rushes inside from high pressure to low pressure. The lungs get expanded in this way. So over here in this diagram you can see this, that the diaphragm is contracted and the rib cage expands, and as a result the air enters inside the body. In expiration, the opposite happens. It is just reverse of inspiration. During this process, the air moves out from the lungs. Both intercostal muscles and diaphragm are relaxed. This moves the ribs inside and diaphragm becomes flat. Both the activities depress the chest inside, the volume of thoracic cavity, that is the chest, is decreased, causing an increase upon the pressure on lungs. This forces the air present in lungs to the outside of the body through the air passages. So this is how expiration takes place. Gaseous exchange in alveoli, we have already studied this, but let's go over it once again. The gaseous exchange takes place at the level of alveoli. Oxygen brought in by air is taken up by the hemoglobin of RBCs, that is the red blood cells of blood, and vice versa. The carbon dioxide brought by the blood is given out to the air present in alveoli. This gaseous exchange involves diffusion. Diffusion means the moving of gas from an area of higher concentration to lower concentration, and in this case it is happening through the permeable membrane of the air sac as well as the blood vessel. So the gaseous exchange involves diffusion, which becomes possible at this level because both alveolus and blood capillaries are only one cell layered in thick. So they are their thickness is very less, they are very thin, and therefore this gaseous exchange through diffusion can easily take place. That's all for today. See you next time with a new video. Allah Hafiz.